Democrats are not the only ones licking their wounds and trying to figure out how things could have gone so wrong. The mainstream media itself is worried that they're losing their total grip on power and on control of the narrative.
This year's crop of media luminaries include Joe Rogan, Charlemagne the God, and social media influencers. Here with us now to discuss what is next for media is Steve Krakauer, author of Uncovered: How the Media Got Cozy with Power. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Hey, great to be here.
So just let's start off at the top. What are your takeaways, so to speak, from this campaign and the media's role within it?
Yeah, I completely agree with how you set it up. I think that we see a few things happening, and obviously when you have an election like this, any election, but particularly one that is this decisive, there's going to be, the think pieces are going to be flowing. So I will say, there's not one diagnosis, but a few things stand out to me. First of all, I think, let me do it to the social media side. Social media and in relation to how it goes with new media, because we saw a few things happening. Yes, we saw Taylor Swift, for example, endorse Kamala Harris in an Instagram post. Never really speak out about it. And you think, there's no way for us to look at exit polls of where the Swiftie vote broke down, but I am curious to know if that actually moves the needle, because I'm not sure it does. Where, especially when you contrast that with something like Joe Rogan, who does these 3-hour-long interviews with Donald Trump, then JD Vance, then Elon Musk, even before he then, on a late night, on a Monday night before the election, endorsed Trump, just giving a real sense of substance, real nuance, conversation, that it seems, at least, to move the needle much more than just a random post on Instagram and just a social media influencer doing something. Even like Aiden Ross, who was actually given a shout out by Dana White in that Trump victory speech. This is a streamer, appeals to Gen Z, particularly young males. That wasn't just an endorsement in a post on social media, but an hour-long live stream that you got to see Donald Trump in a different way. So I think the idea of substance in this election, rather than just general influence, what used to be a kind of a cachet of like, okay, this person is we're going to just go along with what this person posts on any platform, Instagram, TikTok, wherever. That seemed to move the needle much more than just like a one-off post here. So I think that is definitely an interesting element of this election.
Yeah, you're sort of referencing a really interesting X thread I saw yesterday from a Time reporter about how the Trump podcasting schedule came to be, how this young staff member of the Trump campaign got in touch and said, these are the list of podcasts I want you to do. And Trump actually said, talk to my son Barron about it. I don't know any of these people. And so Barron helped plan that. He's not very involved overall in the campaign, but helped plan the appearance with Aiden Ross, ultimately Joe Rogan, and everyone they went on in between. I think you're so right. And this is a different kind of interview that takes place on these podcasts. And the mainstream media people often are very dismissive of these podcasts for not having the same level of adversarial questioning. When you do from the traditional media, when you do an interview with a political figure, you're supposed to be scoop driven. You're supposed to be news making driven. You're supposed to ask them something new that's going to prompt them to answer a question in a different way where it generates its own headline. Joe Biden said this for the first time. That's the mindset of, those of us who've worked in traditional media. But that's not what these podcasts are. Sometimes 3 hours long conversations where you just get to feel like you know the person better, and that is there's a massive new audience for that kind of thing that I don't think the mainstream understands.
Totally, yeah. I mean, a few things there. First of all, the idea that this Time magazine piece, really fascinating, and as you point out, Barron Trump, 18-year-old Barron Trump, led this strategy of where his dad should go and appear, and it began with Aiden Ross, and then continued through places like Theo Von, through the Nelk Boys, through Andrew Schultz, and then ultimately Joe Rogan. And the idea was appeal to young males in particular, but really people who are political independents, not very political at all, but have anything that they think about when it comes to politics comes through the side door, comes through culture. And you look at those interviews and you're absolutely right. Yeah, Andrew Schultz, for example, was not trying to make news. He's a comedian, very popular podcast, sat down with Donald Trump in a very funny interview that showed a totally different side of him. But he made news because he got Donald Trump to reveal for the first time. And then ultimately this has become like a thing that Trump talks about in rallies, the weave. We learned about the way that Trump thinks about how he does, answers questions, for example, or talks during a rally is you start at a place and then you do your weave and you come back to it. It's become like this iconic, phrase that he said, but he never had actually revealed that before this Andrew Schultz interview. So you end up breaking news anyway. And you contrast that with Kamala Harris. Think about this. I saw another interview that was happening, and someone said, what the left needs is their own Joe Rogan. And someone said, no, they had their own Joe Rogan. His name was Joe Rogan. He voted for Bernie Sanders 4 years ago. Like, you've lost Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan was ready to do an interview with Kamala Harris, have her come down to Austin, 3 hours, sit down, have a conversation. He calls these conversations, not interviews. And it could have been a great opportunity. And it certainly could have invalidated the Trump side of it. Trump does 3 hours, Kamala does 3 hours, everyone moves on, but she can't do it. She refused to do it. Her campaign wanted him to go and fly to her, and it would only be 1 hour. And he's like, no, this is an opportunity for you to come and do this. Speak to millions and millions of people who come at politics in a different way. And she either refused to do it or she couldn't do it, because the truth is that, as we learned, Kamala Harris does not have that in her arsenal to have a conversation. Free-flowing, casual for 3 hours. That's not something that she has in her skill set. And this is an election where that mattered. People want that authenticity, and you got that in the strategy that Trump employed.
Let me take the other side of this argument to some extent, Steve, in terms of the issue of the sort of long podcast conversational style versus the traditional, let's say, 60 minutes style of interview. I do take the point about authenticity. I do take the point that it isn't always the best thing for anyone to try to boil down very complicated political interviews into 3 minutes, or to be constantly looking for a soundbite. But whenever we have people seeking the highest office in the nation, seeking to be commander-in-chief, and they're having these kind of bro chats, or whatever the equivalent would be on the female side with Kamala Harris, is there not a danger that we just lose any sense of people seeking the presidency being rightfully held accountable by media questioners?
I think you're right. Yeah. And I am of the camp that Donald Trump should have done the 60 minutes interview. Traditionally, both candidates do 60 minutes, and it became like the Rogan. Both candidates do the Rogan interview. I think Donald Trump should have taken up 60 minutes on their offer to do the interview. It would have been adversarial. It would have been a tough back and forth, but he can do that. We've seen him do that just fine. And I think he should have done that. And frankly, I think that Kamala Harris sitting down and doing it did not help her a lot either. There were some moments in there that she really flailed. I think that Trump could have taken that, and he should have. And I am a big supporter of the kind of playing the both ends of the spectrum here. I think 60 Minutes appeals to a totally different demographic. It's older, but it's a valuable voting group that you want as well. And so I think that Trump did some. J.D. Vance was really deployed on that front to do those kind of the mainstream interviews on every network. I mean, he was ubiquitous on corporate, traditional media, as he should be. There should be a representative of the campaign on that front. But I have to say, when I look at what was the legacy media's legacy of this election, I think about unity. I think about their talking point that Liz Cheney represented unity on the Democratic side. That was the country over party. That was obviously pushed from the Kamala Harris campaign, but also from the media themselves. And you think about that's what they think of unity, this person who has no appeal to the right and frankly no appeal to the left. When you have on the other side a story that was completely ignored that I think will become a years-long conversation, Elon Musk, a guy who was on the left, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a Democrat, Tulsi Gabbard, who was high up in the Democratic Party, who are going and endorsing Trump. I think the average person, the average voter, sees that as unity and sees the mainstream media ignoring that unity in favor of Liz Cheney and Kamala Harris as another sign of why their trust is being eroded.
Very quickly before we let you go, when Trump won in 2016, as unhappy as members of the media were about it, it was good for business, the Trump resistance being good for views and shares and clicks, etc., ended up being a gift to mainstream media's business models, fundamentals for a few years at least. That's collapsed again. Biden is just a more boring figure to cover from a media perspective. Do you predict the media is going to have, the mainstream legacy institutions are going to have another resurgence now that Trump is back? Or is there just so much fatigue or frankly so much subscription canceling from angry libs, whoever they had left, that it's not going to matter this time around?
No, I don't see the resurgence at all. I think that the Trump next administration is going to be seen differently. I think that there's more of a mandate, frankly, that we saw. You can't say that he just squeaked this one by. I mean, this was a full scale, just landslide that he won by. And I think that what we've seen is that for 4 years, and you could make an argument for 8 years, the media has portrayed a narrative about Donald Trump and frankly about Trump supporters that this election proved they are completely wrong. And I don't want to say they're wrong, but just that there is a rejection by the public across broad swaths of the electorate that say, we don't subscribe to that. So sure, there will be a, hashtag resistance that the corporate media can appeal to. But I think that they have seen that it's not real, it's not big, and people rejected that. And so I don't think that that can be part of the business model this time. I think that if it is, it will be just another failure of frankly, of curiosity, of journalism, but also from a business perspective, it's not going to work this time.
Steve Krakauer, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime.